Hi, I'm Linda Mal, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Carter Museum of American Art and speak with curator Shirley Reece-Hughes about the exhibition Self-Taught Genius, Treasures from the American Folk Art Museum. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, I'm here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art with curator Shirley Reece-Hughes to talk about the new exhibition, Self-Taught Genius. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So can you start us off by giving us an overview of a lot of the works that are within this exhibition?
Absolutely. This is the collection of the American Folk Art Museum in New York, and there's literally 116 objects in the show from the 18th century all the way to the 21st century, and the works that are included range from paintings, sculpture, ceramics, textiles, quilts, embroidery, carved figures. There's a little bit of something for everyone.
Can you tell us a little bit about the differences between the terms folk art, outsider art, and this self-taught art?
Absolutely. Folk art is a term that's traditionally associated with the earliest art makers in the United States. And those were individuals who were self-taught. And the idea that they wanted to really capture the citizenry. So portraiture was one of the first most popular art forms in America. But as folk art, as we think of it today, and as it really was even expressive back then, it's almost expressive more of the culture of a community. So folk implying a larger subset of a community and what its beliefs were, its social history, its cultural ideals. So that's largely how we associate folk art today. There are those terms, self-taught and outsider artists, and those are terms, often coined by folks who are with either art critics or artists. It was Jean Dubuffet in France who coined the term art brut, meaning literally translating as raw art, that we often now associate with outsider artists in America. And he coined the term referring to when he was focusing on people with psychological challenges and also artwork of children. So outsider artist became a term that was relatively popular in the 20th century when I think art historians and critics were trying to find a way of defining artists who were outside the mainstream. Artists, in other words, who didn't attend academies, didn't sort of follow suit, who were creating artworks for patrons, but were creating artworks for themselves. But the term is really sort of denigrating, so it's sort of, because it implies a sort of marginalization of the artist. We try to encompass now thinking about the artist as self-taught being a term more reflective of the fact that the individual didn't fall within the traditional canon of in art history or going to academies or trying to be in the gallery system or things of that nature. So self-taught is a broader term that's often applied and can apply across centuries, really, so this idea of the show itself, the earliest folk artists being self-taught, even up to the 21st century artists who taught themselves how to paint or taught themselves how to draw.
And you mentioned how portraiture was really important in folk art. Can you tell us about the difference between some of the portraiture we would find in this exhibition, the differences between that and, say, other artists that were well known of that day?
Absolutely. So portraiture was really, as we think about the building of the new nation, portraiture was the first art form that was recognized because individuals wanted to be remembered. And so many artists, they were itinerant artists, so they literally traveled around and painted likenesses of people and captured individuals that would otherwise be lost to us today. So they're really important historic documents, but they're also a reflection of the pride and the citizenry of the building of the new nation. And also there was a pride in the portraits of the individuals who were represented because many of them were self-made or had made their own means in America, sort of that idea of coming to America and building themselves up.
We're standing in front of a portrait by Aimee Phillips. It's a girl in a red dress with a cat and a dog, a very iconic painting of this period. And do we know a lot about the artist or how he became known as a portraitist?
You know, it's interesting because Aimee Phillips is one of the early American portraitists that we do have information on, and he had quite a long career. And it was interesting because he was born in 1788, so he was born in that moment in America's building, you know, its future, and so he was really part of that optimistic nationalism, and he became a better artist as he went. Mm-hmm. He actually died during the strife of the Civil War, but this is an iconic work by him reflecting on how he'd really mastered his skills more, that he was really striving for likeness of the individuals, whereas sometimes other artists who were self-taught were less able to capture the likeness of their sitters. And here he used a particular trope, which was a young girl holding a cat reflected her own sort of tranquil demeanor. It was symbolic, having a cat in their arms, that they too could raise and nurture someone. So that idea of kind of putting forth their own sitter's character. And then the dog at her feet is also another popular trope at that moment, with the same idea of the domestic pets. And her in her finest finery here, this red dress and the red necklace. And the beauty of, we sing Aimee Phillips brushstrokes, there's literally a green chair in the background, this idea that he was becoming more accomplished as not only a stylist, but also a colorist in his works.
Do we know anything about how he got people to sit for him, how he found these people?
Well, he was among the itinerant portraitists, and so there was a market for individuals who wanted their portraits. And a lot of times there are, if they remain, there's advertisements in newspapers by these artists who said, you know, we'll paint your portrait for, you know, a certain amount of money, sometimes as upwards of $5. And Aimee had become, as artists by word of mouth became popular and well known for creating good likenesses, then their reputation spread. So they traveled around looking for their sitters, and that's really how they made their economic means.
So we're standing in front of a work by Henry Darger, who holds a very important part of the collection of the American Folk Art Museum. Can you tell us a little bit about his background and this image behind us?
Yeah, absolutely. Darger was literally lived in a one-room apartment in Chicago, was a recluse, and taught himself how to draw and how to paint. And he's written probably one of the longest fictional life stories entitled Realm of the Unreal. And it's the story of fictional characters he entitled the Vivian Girls, which is represented right beside us. And this book is literally 15,000 pages long. And it's his own vision of war, and what's interesting is he did draw upon historic facts from the Civil War, but as you can see, his heroines, he entitled the Vivian Girls, which is represented here, and he took the idea, his model for the Vivian Girls was from 20th century illustrations and advertisements, those very sort of sweet and very innocent pictures of girls. But Darger sort of transforms them into his own vision. Many of the girls have male genitalia, they're warriors, they're supposed to be fighting evil. A lot of these stories are about the good versus evil. And when adults are pictured, sometimes they're pictured as satanic characters, sometimes as evil characters. But this particular watercolor and drawing on paper, which is two-sided, is one of the illustrations for the stories in the book. And that was the majority of his drawings that he did. They were illustrating this particular book that he created.
And he was one of the artists who never really wanted his work to be shown while he was alive. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, what's interesting is he was living in this one-room apartment in Chicago, and then in 1973 he needed some assisted living and moved into a facility. And at that time, his neighbor and friend and photographer, Nathan Lerner, actually, when he going into the apartment, found all of his handwritten books. He's also written an autobiography that's over 2,000 pages. It's also enclosed in our exhibition, and found all these handwritten books, all of his drawings, and just was mesmerized by his inventiveness, by his raw expression, and wanted to exhibit them, and helped. They went to the proper individuals in the family, and then were later transferred into the American Folk Art Museum. But it's understood that when Darger was told that his artwork was uncovered and that individuals were looking at it, he became very upset because he never intended the work for anyone else. And that's a fascinating characteristic about many of these self-taught artists, particularly the 20th century ones and 21st century ones, is they weren't creating art for an art market, they weren't creating art for galleries or an audience, they were creating artwork for themselves.
We want to thank Shirley for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.